20% nationally from the peak. There seems to be daily different predictions about where the property market is heading.
The credit agency Moody's has recently predicted a further fall. So here to explain this and the other big finance stories is Karl from Irish Mortgage Brokers and columnist with The Sun on Sunday. Karl, you're very welcome along. Now, last time you were sitting there, Karl, you were saying, now's a good time to buy. Now's a good time to buy in Dublin.
Yeah.
And then we get this from Moody's saying prices are falling further.
I know.
Where lies the truth?
I can almost sense the glee of saying, Karl, look what you said before, and now I have you. Now I have you back in that awkward space.
It's so hard to know, isn't it? It's so hard for potential property buyers to know.
Yeah. Well, okay. Moody said property prices are going to drop 20%. So let's look at that. When you say property prices, you're taking in all properties all over the country of every single type, and you're putting them in a box, and you're talking about how that box will perform. Yesterday, the ESRI said something like what I said last week, so now is where I get to throw it back at you, that if you buy a property in the city, that we're going to see prices in cities start to shoot up, because the property market is big. You know, it's physically, it is the size of this nation, effectively, and different places perform differently. We have a massive oversupply. Everybody knows that. What they might not realise is that most of the supply is in areas that people don't want to live. And unfortunately, it's not a case where you can pick a property out of somewhere in the Midlands and plonk it down in Dublin, where it might actually have a demand. The ongoing trend in society is for cities. National Geographic had a big spread actually back in, I think it was 2007, that said for the first time in human history, more than half of people lived in cities. That demand and that change is going on around the world. And that is why I've said for some time that cities, specifically non-apartment houses in cities, is really the place that you need to look for, and that's the area where you'll see a recovery when one comes along.
Okay, if you're going to buy rurally, you should wait then.
Well, if you're going to buy in a rural area, the question is, should you wait? Again, let's look at what Moody's said, for instance, which puts all properties into the same area. There are, for instance, types of rural property that will have large tracts of farmland on them that might have additional planning or sites or amenities that will mean that when that house comes on the market, it's not like going into a state where you've got a choice of 40 and they're all the same. Rural houses tend to be more of a one-off type, and so you can't just say that there's this generic ball of information. Personally, if I was buying as an investor, I'd stay away from rural areas. And that's taking it from the view of saying that you buy property with a view of getting something back from it. If I was buying as a person who lives in a rural area, I would want to get whatever's the best choice of property in that area. So I'd want to be near my schools, you know, near my major roads, near the shops, and those considerations then come into play. And if houses aren't coming up for sale in the area that you've identified, you kind of have a choice of either pay perhaps more than you think it should be worth, or sit it out and rent long term. So everywhere has a different set of criteria.
Okay, now in fairness too, we did talk about stabilisation of house prices in cities, particularly Dublin, but you did predict, and Angela was here with you that day, you did predict further falls dotted around the country because of the way the market was right now. So
we'll give you that.
We'll give them that.
I don't think you guys should look back on the tape, because it's incredibly hard now when all these things that I've said in the past come back and you know it's good.
There are the property companies, Sherry Fitz, are disputing those figures from Moody's, and you know are saying, you know, it's sort of different in the city. So you know,
you've got issues with the data. I think everybody is looking at pretty good sets of data, but it's not representative of everything. So when we talk about Moody's, they're talking about a specific set of data, which is mortgages that were packaged up and sold on, because Moody's is actually providing the rating on those, on that box of mortgages. It's called a securitized mortgage pool. When you look at Sherry Fitz, they're getting a live read from the market as it's happening, but only with the properties that they have for sale. And then we've got the Central Statistics Office, and they're saying the market is doing something different again, and they're basing it on mortgage drawdowns. But let's not forget that the mortgage drawdowns are based on a price that was probably set 5 or 6 months ago and is only closing now. So you've got this issue of no one having the overall blanket view and definitive version of what's happening out there, and that's why you get these stories that might at first seem contradictory. You know, one group like the ESRI is saying, oh, prices will rise in cities. Moody's say prices will drop 20%. The thing is, everybody might be right. And that's the thing that's really confusing about it. But you've got to break it down a little bit further to get the real picture of it.
Okay. There's no talk from the person who's sitting in the big chair at NAMA that we should be taking a look at a mortgage banking system.
That's something that, yeah, Peter Bacon said that recently in a report that he did for Treasury Holdings, who are actually in a big dispute with NAMA because NAMA's trying to take over certain projects that they're running. I think that something that gets lost in the overall argument about banks not lending, etc., is that if a bank has money at any given stage, if you put a deposit with a bank, that becomes a liability. And when they lend that money out, it becomes an asset. And a bank has a choice. Let's just imagine for a moment that Claire is Spain and Martin is still Martin. You get to be a whole country by yourself. Martin, you're relegated to just being an individual.
Okay, I'm an island. Come on.
He's always happy being himself anyway. So, I can get a return of 3% by lending to Martin, and he might not pay me back. Or I can lend to a whole country, and I know that you're good for it. And not only that, but I'll get twice as much as I'll get from Martin. What am I going to do? So there's things like that in the market that people sometimes lose sight of. The banks will always have a preference for the lowest risk and the highest return, and at the moment they're not getting it with people, and that's one of the things that is really wrong with mortgages. The pricing is upside down.
Right. Well, unfortunately, Karl, we've run out of time. We wanted to get to some good news today on the apps front and some good finance apps out there for people. We will get to them again, we promise you.
I'll come back.
For now, thanks for coming in today. As always, thanks, Karl.
Cheers,
and don't forget, if you've missed any of the programme, you can catch it online at tv3.ie/3player.
Now, coming up tomorrow,